You are being exploited, and you can't see the game because you're too busy performing for an audience that doesn't care whether you live or die. Every time you beg for validation, every moment you wait for someone else to confirm your worth, you hand them the leverage and show them where it works. This isn't about being nice or building relationships. This is about survival, and you're failing. The hunger for approval turns you blind. Not metaphorically blind, but functionally blind. Your brain literally cannot process red flags when those signals come from the same source you are desperate to impress. Think about the last time someone whose opinion you craved criticized you, and then followed it with the smallest crumb of praise. The relief came immediately, followed by something deeper, a quiet gratitude for not being dismantled completely. That gratitude is the cage door closing. While you're thanking them for not destroying you completely, you miss the obvious pattern. They are the ones holding the weapon in the first place. This plays out everywhere. The partner who withholds affection until you prove yourself worthy, then hands out love like crumbs to a performing animal. The boss who keeps you desperate for recognition while extracting every scrap of your labor. The friend who makes you feel small, then occasionally makes you feel seen, and you're so grateful for those moments you ignore the months of slow drain in between. You think you're maintaining connections. You're actually funding your own exploitation. The mechanism is simple. When you need someone's approval, you cannot afford to see them clearly. Seeing them clearly means acknowledging what they are taking from you, and acknowledging that puts your access to approval at risk. So your mind does what minds do when survival feels threatened. It protects the source of what you think you need. The abuser becomes the savior. The manipulator becomes the only one who truly understands you. The person draining you dry becomes irreplaceable, and you become their instrument. Jung spent decades watching people destroy themselves this way, and he identified the core truth. This isn't happening to weak people. This is happening to people who abandon their internal authority and outsource their sense of self to external validation. He called the mask you wear for others the persona, and he watched how people would sacrifice their dignity or their interests to keep that mask in place. Because once you've decided your worth comes from someone else's assessment, you've handed them total control without a single contract being signed. Here's what makes this particularly brutal. The more you perform for approval, the less you know yourself. You become a collection of reactions to other people's expectations. When you're alone, you feel empty, because you have spent so long being completely what others needed. This is not just psychological damage. This is strategic dismantling of your defense systems. The manipulator doesn't need to work hard once you are in this situation. They just need to occasionally threaten withdrawal. One cold look, one disappointed sigh, one statement that they expected better from you, and you'll scramble to fix whatever you supposedly broke. You'll apologize for things you didn't do. You'll accept blame for their moods. You'll twist yourself into smaller and smaller shapes trying to fit their shifting requirements. And the entire time, you'll believe you're working on the relationship and showing them you care. That's not true. You're just losing yourself slowly. Jung understood that what you refuse to acknowledge doesn't disappear, it goes underground. Every time you deny your own anger at being used, that anger doesn't vanish. Every time you suppress your knowledge that someone is lying to you because calling them out might cost you their approval, that knowledge doesn't evaporate. All of this gets shoved into a part of your psyche that grows stronger while your conscious awareness grows weaker. You become a divided house. The part of you that knows the truth gets locked in the basement while the part that performs for validation runs the show. The manipulator sees this division and uses it like a crowbar. They say things that trigger your shadow knowledge, the part that knows what's really happening. Then watch how desperately you scramble to suppress that knowledge and return to performing. Each time you choose their approval over your own perception, you drive the division deeper. You become easier to handle, more predictable, and more controllable, and you tell yourself you're being reasonable. Here's the practical reality. You cannot see manipulation clearly, while you're emotionally dependent on the manipulator. Your need creates the blindness. This is not about being smarter or more aware. Intelligence doesn't protect you when your sense of worth is on the line. Educated people, successful people, people who would never fall for an obvious scam. They all fall for this because this is not an intellectual problem. This is about who gets to define your value. And if the answer is someone other than you, you're already compromised. Here is how you break free from this. First, you start tracking your own patterns. When do you feel that need for approval most intensely? Write it down, not to analyze it to death, but to see the pattern clearly. Because these moments pass through your awareness like signals that vanish before you can act on them. You feel the anxiety, do what's expected, get relief, and then you forget the entire cycle happened. Making it visible makes it possible to break the cycle. Second, you practice the thing that feels most dangerous, disappointing people on purpose. Small doses. Say no when you usually say yes, not because you want to be difficult, but because you need to prove to yourself that withdrawal of approval isn't death. Watch what happens. Most of the time, nothing happens. People accept your boundary and move on. Sometimes people get angry, and that anger reveals everything you need to know. Someone who respects you will accept your boundary. Someone who's been using your need for approval will pressure or punish you. This is how you identify who's been feeding on your hunger. Third, you rebuild your internal reference point. This sounds abstract, but it is tangible. You need to develop the ability to know what you think and feel without checking someone else's face for permission. Spend time alone, not distracted, scrolling through other people's lives, but actual solitude where you have to sit with yourself. Ask yourself what you actually want, not what you should want, not what would make someone else happy. The first 100 times you do this, you'll come up empty. That emptiness is the problem made visible. You've been externally referenced for so long there's no one home. But keep sitting with that emptiness. Eventually, something starts to form. Small preferences, actual opinions, feelings that arise from your own experience rather than from trying to match what someone else expects. This is the beginning of internal authority. This is what makes you unmanipulatable. Not because you become hostile or suspicious, but because you develop a center of gravity that doesn't shift based on someone else's approval or disapproval. Fourth, you learn to recognize the manipulation techniques that specifically target approval seeking. They praise you randomly, so you never know when the next dose of validation is coming. This keeps you hooked better than constant praise ever could. They compare you to others. I thought you were different, or most people understand this, making you scramble to prove you're special. They promise future rewards. Once you prove yourself, things will change, keeping you performing for a payoff that never arrives. These are not relationship dynamics. These are control mechanisms, and they only work on people who've outsourced their worth. Here is a brutal truth. Some people will leave when you stop performing. Every person who can only stay in your life while you're diminished was never there for you in the first place. They were there for what they could extract. Losing them is not loss, it's clarity. It's the trash taking itself out. The people who remain when you stop begging for approval, those are your actual relationships. Everything else was transaction disguised as connection. Jung talked about individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who others need you to be. Most people hear that and think it's about self-discovery, finding yourself, and all that soft language. Individuation is violent. It's the process of killing off the false self you created to survive, and that false self doesn't die quietly. It will use every trick it knows to keep you performing, because performing is what it does. It will tell you that being yourself is selfish, that setting boundaries feels cruel, that refusing to beg for approval means you do not care about relationships. All of it is a lie. The false self is a parasite wearing your face, and it works with every manipulator who's ever used your need for validation against you. Killing it means killing their access point. This is why manipulators rage when you stop seeking their approval. You've just closed the door they've been walking through for years. The transformation isn't about becoming cold or isolated. It's about becoming sovereign. You develop the capacity to receive approval without needing validation desperately, to hear criticism without collapsing, to walk away from situations where the price of admission is your dignity. You stop being a target because you stop broadcasting the signal that says, I need you to tell me I'm worthwhile. Manipulators lose interest fast when their techniques stop working. They don't waste time on people who won't hand over control. But here's the warning. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee the machinery. You'll recognize it everywhere, in yourself, in others, in entire social structures built on the exchange of approval for compliance. You'll see how many people around you are still performing, still desperate, still being used. Some of them will resent you for breaking free. Your refusal to play the game makes them look at their own participation, and most people would rather attack you than face that mirror. This knowledge is a blade that cuts both ways. Use it to free yourself, yes. But understand that freedom from this pattern doesn't make you popular. It makes you dangerous. Dangerous to systems that run on people begging for validation. Dangerous to individuals who've built their power on dispensing approval. Dangerous to your old self that wanted to believe performing would eventually earn you the love you've been chasing. You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to see clearly and act accordingly. The truth is simple. Every moment you spend seeking someone else's approval is a moment they spend using that need to redirect your energy toward their interests. Stop begging. Start building. Build a self that doesn't need permission to exist. Build relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchies of validation. Build a life where your worth is natural rather than externally sourced. The people who love you when you stop performing, keep them close. The people who can only tolerate you when you're diminished, they were never yours to lose. And the part of you that's been desperate for approval all these years, it served a purpose once. Maybe you needed it to survive childhood, or maybe it got you through situations where you had no power. Thank it for that service, then let it go. What protected you once is now the thing making you vulnerable. This isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. This is about becoming the actual version. The one that exists when no one's watching. The one that makes decisions based on truth rather than chasing validation. That version is already there, underneath all the performance. You just have to be willing to let everything else burn. You want to detect manipulation? Stop feeding the hunger manipulators use as their entry point. Your approval seeking is their permission slip. Revoke that access immediately. The clarity that comes after will show you exactly who's been using you and exactly how long you've been letting them. What you do with that information determines whether you spent your life as someone else's puppet or whether you finally picked up your own. The choice was always yours. You've just been too busy performing to make the decision. Subscribe to Psyche Cypher if you're ready to see what happens when you stop asking permission to exist.